So getting ready to review how we build a linear equation. A few things that we have to review are what are the forms of a linear equation. There were three of them. The first one was slope intercept form. This is the most popular. It is the form that I want you to end all of your problems on the homework. And slope intercept form was y equals mx plus b. The y was just our output. The x is the input. That's where we would plug in numbers that we want and see what we get out. Independent, dependent variable. M is how the graph moves. It's referred to as the slope. And that is rise over run in this ratio. It is always a fraction, even if it's just a whole number. That's how we get the first part of the name, slope. B was the y-intercept, where the graph crosses the y-axis. So for instance, here's my graph, here's my line. This point right here is the y-intercept. The y-intercept is also referred to as the starting point. Where does this graph kind of start? It starts here, goes this way, and goes that way. The second form is the point slope form. Point slope form is very useful for helping us build an equation from tables and points. This one we want to use for tables and points. Point slope form was y minus y1 equals m, then in parentheses x minus x1. Once again, y and this x right here are just the input and the output. We plug a number in here, it would go through all the rest of these numbers and tell us what we get out. That's because even though we have a bunch of letters, m, x1, and y1 would all be numbers. M is still how we move. This is still the slope. Nothing has changed. X1 over here is just part of a point. And it's the x-coordinate of the point. The thing we have to be cautious of is we have to take the opposite sign of this point. The same thing for the y1. This is the y-coordinate of our point. Once again, has to be the opposite sign. For an example, y minus 3 equals 2/3 x plus 2. The information from this equation, m and our point, m is the 2/3, but our point, always x and then y. So the 2 would be here, the 3 would go here, but we have to take the opposite sign. So the opposite of the 2 would be -2. Opposite of this -3, +3. The reason why it's the opposite sign is because already in the equation do we have this minus. The minus is already present. So if we look over here, this minus isn't actually connected to the 3. because it's already in the equation. But when we look at this part, that's no longer a minus, that's a plus. The only way to make this minus sign become a plus sign is if there were two minuses next to each other. Therefore, the 2 had to be negative. And the third and final form, the one that's the most difficult to work with for graphing purposes, is standard form. Standard form is ax plus by equals c. Tough part about standard form, it's the x is still in, the y is still out. That hasn't changed at all. But a, b, and c are unimportant numbers. They don't tell us slope. They don't tell us y-intercept. They don't tell us just a regular point. Unfortunately, they tell us nothing. And this is a form that we aren't going to use to help us build our equations. We're going to use point-slope form and slope-intercept form. So when you have a graph like this, you want to use slope-intercept form as your first attempt. Always slope-intercept form. The only time you wouldn't use slope-intercept form is if maybe the line's way over here and you don't have a y-intercept. We don't know where this line is going to cross the y-axis. So you can't use the intercept if you don't know where it is. You'd have to use point-slope form. But since it does cross, we're going to gather two pieces of information, because slope-intercept form requires us to find m, and it requires us to find b. We don't need to find x or y because our final answer is going to have that x and a y. What it's not going to have is the letter m and b. We need to replace that. So m is the slope. We need 2 points. B is our y-intercept. We need to see where it crosses. This one's the easiest. This is where we're going to start. Crosses right here on the y-axis. I don't care where it crosses on the x-axis. Don't care. Where it crosses the y. And it's at 0, 5. Since it's a positive 5, we get to put a positive 5 on the end of the equation, and we already have half of our answer. Now we have to find the slope. It means we have to find the rise and run between 2 points. We already have 1 point. It's right here. I just have to find another spot, preferably where the line crosses the graph perfectly. I see one right here, and I see another right here. I only need to use 2 of them. It does not matter which 2 we use. So, just to prove it, we're going to use this first point and the very last point. From the first point to the very last point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's negative 10. 1, 2, that's negative 2. Rise over run, negative 10 over negative 2. Always simplify, 5 over 1. And we have our equation. If we had gone the other direction, say from this bottom point to the top point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, over 1, 2, we get positive 10 over positive 2, still 5 over 1. Say we went from this middle point to this point. Doesn't matter which way we move, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over 1. Maybe we decided to go from the top point to the bottom point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over 1. Negative 5 over negative 1. Does not matter, we get this same equation. Maybe we have a perfectly vertical line. So perfectly vertical lines do not satisfy functions, so technically this is not a function. Still able to write it as an equation, however. So the way I remember this one is a line that goes through both the x and the y-axis. So this line went through both the x and the y-axis, is going to have both an x and a y in the equation. Since this one only crosses x, it's only going to have an x in the equation. So this is an x equals. Well, if I were to put a random dot anywhere, what is the x coordinate at any point? It's all negative 4. And there's your equation. In a similar fashion, if I had this perfectly flat line, I know it's not perfect, I'm sorry, and it crossed right through here, it only crosses y, this line would be a y equals, and in this case, negative 3. Last graph, same thing. We want to start with our slope-intercept form, which means we need to find the slope, we need to find the intercept. So we're going to identify 2 points and the y-intercept point. This time I'm going to use those stars. There's our y-intercept. There's a point. There's a point. Picking any 2 that we want. Well, first off, let's get our y-intercept point. 0, 3. So our equation is at least a plus 3 right now. If it was negative, it would be a minus. And then our rate of change, let's just go from this star to this star. Keep it simple this time. Rise over run. So we go down or up first. Down 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the right, so that's positive. There's the equation of our line. The other thing we're going to cover today are getting equations from words. Once again, from a word problem, you still want to use slope-intercept form. So we're still going to be looking for y equals mx plus b, meaning we need to find m, and we need to find b. From a word problem, b is going to represent our start value. M is going to represent how the story changes. So how does the story change? This also is how does one unit compared to another unit. Units comparing units. And it's going to be some sort of rate. Something over something. So the words we're going to be looking for, again, I know it's getting kind of cluttered right here. Looking for the words over, every, like in, divide. There's a lot more, so looking for that. So let's first start and find our start value. So over here, we're going to record our actual information. With all my spare time, I'm able to read in peace. I am able to finish 51 pages every 2 hours, and I was already on page 30. So this page 30 is our start value. I started 30 pages. The other 2 numbers are probably going to be our rate. We even see our keyword every right there. So what's happening for that every? I have 51 pages every 2 hours. What we should notice is that this unit and this top unit have to be the same. So there's our information. Y equals 51 over 2x plus 30. Let's try another one. My candy bar supply is dwindling, being locked up. I had 23 to start this event, and I am eating 6 bars every 11 days. Alright, so again, where do I start? And what is changing? Well, I started with 23, and I'm eating 6 every 11 days. Again, 23 candy bars, and 6 candy bars. Again, they match up, we're good. 6 over 11x plus 23. As the days continue to pass, my enjoyment of sleeping is staying a level 9 in level. This one's a little more of a challenge one. So as days continue to pass, my enjoyment doesn't seem to change. So the thing that's missing is I don't have any change. Nothing's changing. So in this problem, there is no m. Or you can think of m equaling 0, because there's no change. I'm not changing my enjoyment of it. Looks like my enjoyment, though, started at 9 and isn't changing. So this equation would be y equals 0x plus 9, or just a 9.